Good evening, and welcome to Conversations Around the Diocese, a program brought to you by We Are the Church. Please note that the views expressed here are solely those of the speakers and do not represent that of the Anglican Diocese of Jamaica and the Cayman Islands. Our conversation this evening will be facilitated by Monique Castle, a member of the Cathedral Church of St. Diego de la Vega, Spanish Town. Now, sit back, relax, join and enjoy the conversation. Remember that together we are the church.
Good evening, friends, and welcome to another conversation around the diocese. It is good to be with you this evening. Just to remind you of our objectives of conversations around the diocese, it is to provide a forum for people to have open conversation around pertinent issues to help people navigate the world from a theologically and spiritually informed perspective and to equip people to pray aright. And so our topic this evening is a topic that has been on our lips, in our minds, affecting us, touching so many of us in so many ways. And sometimes it is even taboo to talk about. But this evening, we are going to have the conversation around gender-based violence. And we have our panelists lined up this evening. We have with us Miss Chanel Nevers, Mrs. Marika Brown Bailey, and we have Pastor Carl Smith from the Jamaica Council of Churches, as well as Mrs. Patricia Donald Phillips. Allow me to introduce to you our social media correspondent, Father Bertram Gale. Father Gale, welcome.
Thank you so very much, Monique. How you do?
I am fine. How are you doing?
All right. I'm looking forward to this conversation this evening, and I'm sure
Yes.
as well.
Yes, I am looking forward to hearing the questions as well as the comments that we are inviting from our viewers. Do remember that you have the opportunity to put your questions and your comments in the chat for our panelists, and they will answer as they go along. They do have a good conversation ready, a good presentation ready. I think it's going to be interactive, they say. So I am looking forward to it. So Father Gale, please get the social media going for us, right?
I sure will.
Okay. All right. So viewers, to start our conversation, we will begin with Pastor Carl Smith. And Pastor Carl Smith comes to us from the Jamaica Council of Churches, and he will give us an overview of the project that is currently underway with gender-based violence. Pastor Carl Smith?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to be here this evening as we share in this occasion. I just wanted to say it is my pleasure to be a part of this conversation. The Jamaica Council of Churches has been around for a long time, thinking about 83 years, and it is made up of 12 church organizations. And as we seek to work together to enable the justice and programs of our denominations, this we seek to do through representation of various stakeholder groups within the Jamaican society. The extent of the ecumenism that is a part of the Jamaica Council of Churches is represented in its leadership over the years. Presently, we have the Bishop Christine Gooden Bengucci as president, and we have had the Most Reverend Kenneth Richards as immediate past president, and other stalwarts of many denominations who have led this august organization. Exemplified in the words of one of our member churches, Reverend Jonathan Hemmings. He says, prayer in itself will not address some of the fundamental issues at the root of the problem in our nation. It is advocating that poorer among us, the disadvantaged among us, get better treatment in our hospitals, in society. And these are things that the Jamaica Council of Churches seek to advocate for. We advocate for the provision of family life, health, education. We are involved in various ministries through the agencies, and we seek to partner with the government in enabling the people of Jamaica in its programs, through its programs, to benefit from that which government ought to provide. Awareness of sexual reproductive health, education, and community health fears are some of the areas in which we seek to work in churches and in communities. There are many things that the Jamaica Council of Churches seek to do to ensure that as a nation, we are aware of the love of God for every person, no matter the creed or class. So as we engage in this conversation, it is my hope that you will become more aware and become more involved in what we do through the Jamaica Council of Churches. I thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pastor Carl, for that input. And we do look forward to your sharing as the conversation continues. Now, viewers, our panelists, as I said to you for this evening, include Mrs. Marika Brown-Bailey and also Chanel Nevers and Mrs. Patricia Donald Phillips. So I take the liberty now of giving you the introduction of these ladies, and then we just move right into the conversation. So Mrs. Brown-Bailey is a gender specialist at the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, CDEMA. And as the gender specialist, she's responsible for guiding the integration of gender equality into national and community level interventions aimed at strengthening response to disaster within the CDEMA participating states. Her interests include gender mainstreaming, gender analysis, and gender in policy development. Our next panelist, Chanel Nevers, is a social sustainability and inclusion expert with 9 years experience in holistic community development and poverty alleviation. Currently, she's a gender, youth, and social inclusion specialist with ACDI VOCA, an international development nonprofit organization. Her expertise focuses on the design, planning, and implementation of projects, the development of strategies and action plans for institutional strengthening, as well as leading the process of identifying and addressing gender-specific constraints which may limit social and economic empowerment. Mrs. Patricia Donald Phillips is no stranger to us, and she is a gender justice activist. She's a member of St. Margaret's Anglican Church. She's the administrator at Christ Church Vineyard Town and the founding member of WMW Jamaica, a gender justice NGO. Ladies, welcome to the conversation. Thank you so much for volunteering, for being so willing to come into the conversation and sharing with us on a topic that is so, what we say, a little ticklish, because there is a stigma around gender-based violence. So sometimes, as I said, you know, we want to talk about it. We don't know how to talk about it. There are those of us who suffer from it. And so thank you for coming into this space and sharing with us. I do invite Chanel and Marika to start the conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you, Monique, for that wonderful introduction. I'm just checking, is everyone seeing my screen, as in seeing my slideshow?
Yes, yes, we are seeing it clearly.
Okay, wonderful. So interestingly, it's not showing on my screen, but yeah. Marika, are you seeing it in slideshow?
Yes, Chanel, I'm seeing it in slideshow.
All right, perfect. All right, wonderful. All right, everyone. So thank you again for that wonderful introduction. So Marika and I would like to welcome everyone to the discussion forum on gender-based violence in Jamaica. This forum really aims to explore the status of GBV in Jamaica and the role of the church and the community in addressing this critical issue. So we'll just dive right in. So we'll be splitting this presentation in 3 sections. I'll be speaking a little bit about gender-based violence as in the definition and then some of the root causes. And then Marika is going to give an overview of GBV in Jamaica. And then we will wrap up by speaking a little bit about the role of the church and the community in addressing gender-based violence. So before we get into the presentation, we kind of want to find out how everyone is feeling about gender-based violence in terms of what does the audience consider to be gender-based violence? So I'm going to ask everyone to just type in menti.com. We're just going to have a little bit of an interactive poll. So if everyone can just type in menti.com, that's menti.com. I'm going to stop.
Where do we type it in?
So go onto your browser, whether it's Google Chrome, whether it's Safari, whether it's Bing, just go to your, wherever you go to find Google. Yeah?
Okay.
Yeah, and then you're going to type in menti.com, menti.com, and you're going to type in the code. Step 2, type in the code 626-4011. Once again, that's 626-4011. And then everyone can start selecting their answers for that Mentimeter. And I'm just going to switch my screen for a quick second so we can see what the participants are actually saying in their votes. So the question that everyone will be answering is, which of the following do you consider to be forms of gender-based violence? And you could select all that apply. So let me just stop sharing quickly to share my other screen. Marika, are you able to log on to Menti?
I'm logging on now.
Okay, wonderful.
Well, I
Remember
selected.
So the code is 626-4011. All right, so we have a lot of votes coming in so far. All right, we have 19% saying that everything listed here: physical abuse, emotional and psychological abuse, sexual violence, economic abuse, verbal abuse, neglect, control, and isolation. I have 19% of the respondents saying that all are forms of GBV. Okay, I'm going to give persons about 2 more seconds to respond. And then Marika and I will tell you the answer. Marika will tell you the answer, actually. Yeah, okay, I don't see anyone else voting because I don't see.
I'm not seeing where to vote, so maybe I'm like a couple others. And
Okay, so
results.
So when you go to menti.com, did you type in the code?
Yes, I did. So I'm there now. But I'm seeing
And then
the numbers are changing. Oh, okay. Oh, it's back.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
And then and when you type the code in, then you select your answers. Are you seeing the questions or the responses?
I see the question, but I'm seeing I'm seeing the graph, but I'm not seeing
Okay.
click. Do I click on the I'm just seeing the responses.
I'm not sure why.
Yeah, I'm seeing all the, you know, the columns going up. I'm not seeing where I must click, as if I'm seeing it as if I am the person managing it.
That's very interesting. Oh, well, I see more people voting.
Yeah.
Because
Yes,
it has now,
the numbers are changing. They're actually
yeah,
going up. Mhm.
yeah, the numbers are changing. Okay. So Marika, what's the correct answer here?
So
Oh,
all
I see. Oh, I still see it. I see it changing still. Let's give person, okay. So let's give persons just 3 more seconds to decide their minds. So 11 persons just voted. I have someone else joining. Let me just admit them into the room. Okay. All right, Marika, you could go ahead and give the findings.
So Chanel and colleagues, the answer is all are forms of GBV. So majority of the respondents did indicate that all are forms of GBV, 21%.
Yes, wonderful. Okay, so we're going to dive right back into our presentation. All right, wonderful. So we just want to speak a little bit about what exactly is gender-based violence. We don't want to take it for granted that everyone knows what the exact definition is. So according to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, gender-based violence refers to harmful acts directed at an individual, really based on their gender. It's rooted in gender inequality, the abuse of power, and harmful social norms. So GBV can include a range of violent acts such as physical, sexual, emotional, and psychological abuse, as well as economic deprivation and coercion. So when we speak about social norms are really the unwritten rules and shared expectations that really govern a society. And it's really dynamic. Some examples of social norms are like your dress code, your gender roles, table manners, things that people are essentially expected to do in society. And sometimes when they go against that, the repercussions can be harmful. Yeah. So we are going to speak a little bit about the intersectionality of gender-based violence, because gender-based violence is not a one-phase approach. And when we look at it, we have to look at it in a very holistic way. So we really need a holistic understanding of the persons that we're serving, and intersectionality really provides that. It allows us, Marika and I, as development practitioners and other development practitioners, to really have a more comprehensive understanding of GBV by considering the multiple and overlapping factors that contribute to the violence and its impact. So if we're looking at a victim of gender-based violence in Jamaica, we would have to look at things like their ability, where they live, their age, their gender, their language. And when I say language, it just really speaks to where are they in the geography and that sort of thing. Okay, so we're going to just speak a little bit about the root causes of gender-based violence. So some of the root causes of gender-based violence are cultural and traditional beliefs, patriarchy, and different kinds of power dynamics that Marika is going to speak a little bit about later, economic factors and gender inequality, lack of education and awareness, and of course, social norms that I just mentioned, and the media influence, okay? So if we dissect some of these root causes, we'll see that in terms of cultural and traditional beliefs. When we really think about Jamaican culture often normalizes violence, and it depicts it as a disciplinary tool and as an expression of masculinity, while positioning women and girls as subordinate to men. Also, we have to look at the fact that there's a cultural acceptance of men having multiple partners, which is celebrated rather than condemned, and that further exacerbates some of the GBV issues that we're seeing in the communities. And lastly, society has sort of normalized GBV, and it considers it a very private matter. So there's a strong culture of silence that remains, and Marika is going to get a little bit into the findings of a survey that was conducted where culture of silence was very high. So when we speak about patriarchy and power dynamics, we have to speak a little bit about religion. And the fact is that religion can contribute to gender-based violence through the roles that are often prescribed to men and women in society. And as Monique said earlier, GBV is a very ticklish and is a very taboo topic. And so the church plays a very complex role in the context of gender-based violence in Jamaica. And while it really has a potential to be a force for positive change, in our findings and our research and being on the ground as development practitioners, we recognize that there are some current practices in some churches and traditional beliefs which often contribute to the to perpetuating violence. And we'll speak a little bit more about that later in the presentation. So I also mentioned economic dependency or economic factors and gender inequality as a root cause or as a root factor of gender-based violence. So when we speak about economic dependency, a lot of the females who are often the victims of gender-based violence, they have an economic dependency on male partners, yeah? And so we have a situation where a lot of women often remain in abusive relationships due to financial constraints and lack of resources to support themselves independently. So about 2 months ago, we were doing a study, and one of the quotes from one of the respondents was, a lot of times women stay in abusive relationships because they have no financial independence and nowhere else to go. We'll also speak about financial stress and economic hardships. So financial stress and economic hardships can really exacerbate tensions in the households, and that leads to increased incidences of GBV. And that economic strain can also trigger violent behavior, such as individuals struggling to cope with their circumstances. All right, so we're going to move on to section 2, and I'm going to just hand over to Marika to give an overview of gender-based violence in Jamaica. Marika, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chanel, and good evening again, colleagues. So as Chanel indicated, we have been getting some indication of the root causes of GBV. And we wanted for you to get an understanding of the issue of gender-based violence, particularly in Jamaica. So in 2016, the Jamaican government got support from our international development partners, the United Nations Women Entity, as well as the Inter-American Development Bank. And we recognize through the work that has been done that there were incidents of GBV, but we were not able to adequately measure and adequately determine what that picture looked like. So in order to do that, we had to embark upon what we call a survey, and we did a prevalence study in 2016 with the findings coming out in 2018. And that prevalence survey we dubbed the Women's Health Survey, because it not only looked particularly at the examination of the nature and prevalence of violence against women and girls in Jamaica, but it also looked at some of the intersectionalities that Chanel indicated earlier. It looked at women's ability to speak to these issues. It looked particularly too at what are some of the root causes and what are some of the perception that women themselves have of GBV and why they were in situations of pertaining to GBV, situations of violence rather. So even though we may see the study, the year 2016, we did conduct, this was the first and only prevalence survey that we have done so far. And the importance of the prevalence survey is that it is a representation of what the population looks like. It is a very tedious type of survey, a survey that takes a lot of money to do. So we were very grateful that we were able to get support nationally from our IDPs to help to tell the story of what GBV is and the situation of GBV in Jamaica. So it is a recent and only prevalence study that has been undertaken by the government in Jamaica so far. It's very costly, as indicated, and it is usually done every 5 to 10 years. So we're now looking at how we can sufficiently garner additional funds to do another survey. Another one would be due anytime now in 2026 to basically tell us if there has been any change with what the situation was in 2016 to 2018 to 2026. So so I'm going to now speak to some of the results, some of the issues that came out of that survey. And I want you to look specifically at what we are indicating, because the survey, the results from the survey is very telling. It speaks to some very serious issues, and some issues that we as a church need to look at how we can structurally bring about some change related to GBV. So what the survey tells us is that 1 in every 4 Jamaican woman has experienced physical violence by a male partner. So if there are 10 women in the room, at least 4 of those women have some experience with physical violence by a male partner. It also indicated that at least 7.7% of those women, the respondents, have been sexually abused by a male partner, and 27.8% of Jamaican women experience physical and sexual violence within their lifetime. So what this survey is basically telling us is that it demonstrates that violence against women in Jamaica is very widespread. We may think that just 1 in 4 women, the number do not seem very high. But if there are 10 women in a particular room or 20 women in a particular room, know that at least 8 out of those 20 have experienced some form of physical or sexual violence throughout their lifetime. Right? And it looks particularly at some of the multiple dimensions of violence across women's lifetime. It looks at the recent experiences. It looks at independent partner violence. It also looks at non-partner physical violence. So we recognize that the results from this survey is telling us that violence is very pervasive within the society, and that there, as Chanel indicated earlier, there is a strong culture of silence within our society. Next slide, Chanel. So if we are to look at the abusers, what the respondents indicated is that friends and families and family members are the main abusers of women, right? So there are instances, of course, where women and girls experience violence by people who do not know. However, the majority of those who have experienced this violence from their close friend or a family member. Complete strangers are responsible for non-partner sexual violence committed against rape, for example, committed against women, for example, rape. But for example, the issues pertaining to domestic violence and intimate partner violence, of course, friends and family members are the main perpetrators of violence against women and girls. Next slide, Chanel. So I want to look specifically at this slide, and this slide speaks specifically to the age group of those who experience physical violence. And we see that respondents between the age of 25 to 29, they were the respondents that experienced gender-based violence in terms of the age group. 31% of those between the ages of 25 to 29 experience gender-based violence. But if you look at the age going up as women get older, you recognize that the life cycle as they get older, violence continues. Violence is prevalent, violence is pervasive throughout their lives. And what is also telling is if you look at the age group 60 to 64, 26.6% of women between the ages of 60 to 64 are experiencing violence. So they would have begun to experience violence early in their life, and it would continue up until they're older. And it's
with Marika, one quick second. I was just told that you guys are not seeing the correct slides. Are you seeing the correct slide on the screen, Marika?
Well, I am seeing two slides, but because I know what slide I'm referring to. So what you could do probably, Chanel, is to end the slideshow and restart it. Because
okay, because some people are seeing the Mentimeter still.
Oh no, I'm seeing the slide now.
All right, 1 second. Let me just end it for everyone and just restart it. Yeah, 1 second. Okay, everyone is seeing that now? Are you seeing that, Marika?
Yeah. Right. Age group of those who have experienced physical violence.
Perfect.
So as I was saying earlier, if you continue to look as women progress in age, there is still that prevalence of violence that they're experiencing in their lifetime. And I want to bring the audience specifically to the age group 60 to 64 to indicate that women who are elderly, older women, do experience violence within their lifetime. And it speaks specifically to the issues pertaining to having experienced violence from a young age, and it continues into when women get older. And this has quite a number of implications on women's health. It has quite a number of implications on their family and their family lives, on their children, and how it affects the growth and development of their children. So the life cycle approach to violence has to be looked at specifically if we are to tackle this particular issue. Women experience violence when they're young, and unfortunately, because of that experience, it continues into their lifetime. Next slide. So I want to bring your attention to the issue of early cohabitation. And Chanel mentioned earlier the issues pertaining to culture and how culture drives violence, and how culture and how we see and experience life. It helps to perpetuate violence. So what the survey shows us is that women who are 18 years or younger, the younger that they begin living with and cohabitating with men, the younger age that they enter their first union, these women were twice as likely to experience severe violence than women who are older when they entered into a living relationship with a man. So this also speaks to the issue of power and the hierarchical relationship that exists between a man and a woman. So when young girls begin to cohabitate at an early age with older men, you find that there are issues pertaining to power, and women at this particular age become so vulnerable that they are exposed to violence, and unfortunately it continues throughout their lifetime. So we know that in our own society there are quite a number of young girls who cohabitate with older men, or they're in relationships with older men. Sometimes we have to step back and examine what are the implications then in terms of violence and how it plays out in society from having these relationships. The survey also speaks to the acts of violence that were perpetuated against women. At least 19, almost 20% of these women indicated that they were slapped. 14, almost 15% indicated that they were beaten. 14.3% indicated that they were pushed. 7.6% indicated that they were kicked. And 7.7% indicated that they were threatened or attacked with a weapon, with a weapon. So it speaks to the issue of the physical violence that our women continuously are plagued with. So we know that emotional violence and psychological violence and financial violence are all part of the grand scheme when we speak to the issue of gender-based violence. But we continue to see that acts of physical violence continues to be prevalent in the experiences of women who go through gender-based violence. What was interesting to note, however, or to note also, is that quite a number of the respondents indicated that they had experienced physical violence throughout their pregnancy. 5.1% of these respondents indicated that they had some experience with physical violence while pregnant, and the perpetrator was the father of the child in majority of the cases. And in those instances, the same man had beaten the woman prior to her being pregnant. So she would have been, that woman or that girl would have been in a relationship with this person before being pregnant, but because of whatever the situation is, or whatever the consequence, the situations are, she would not have found it or found the ability to leave. So she ends up getting pregnant. And even throughout the pregnancy, she continues to experience physical violence. Next slide. So we did touch on the issue of emotional abuse. And sometimes when we think of gender-based violence or intimate partner violence, we oftentimes think of physical violence, but there is the issue of emotional violence. And we find that a relationship is emotionally abusive when there is consistent pattern of abusive words, there's a consistent pattern of bullying. The perpetrator would continue to wear the woman down, or wear down, we say in Jamaican parlance, wear her down, break down her self-esteem and undermine her mental health. And 28, almost 30% of the respondents indicated that they have experienced emotional abuse. And oftentimes the emotional abuse does not walk alone. The emotional abuse is twinned with physical abuse, financial abuse, and psychological abuse. And that also leads to issues in terms of mental health and in terms of the physical health of the woman, because we know that, you know, our emotions and our physical being are one. So quite a number of times when women experience emotional abuse, we see the effects in her mental capacity and in her own physical, the physical health. So when we begin to look at how we can offer some support, we also have to think of not only the physical support that is to be provided, but the emotional and psychological support that has to be provided to the woman for her to fully recuperate from going through these constant types of abuse. Interestingly, as we speak to the issue of culture and power dynamics and understanding violence within Jamaica, when we spoke to the attitudes that these women have towards violence being meted out against them, it was interesting to know that at least almost 31% indicated that you know, violence between husband and wife is a private matter. So that does not warrant me to speak about some of these things that are happening to me, because it should stay in the home. We speak to the issue of the private versus the public, and we still are we still have an understanding, or it is the perception rather remains that violence between a husband and wife is a private matter, so we should not take it any further. If a woman does not physically fight back, it is not considered rape. If a woman is raped, she has done something careless to put herself in this particular situation. And a woman should tolerate violence to keep her family together. And these, my friends, are some of the attitudes that women who have experienced violence have towards violence that is being meted out against them. They deserve it. They must have done something wrong. I am the woman, I am to keep my family together, so I have to tolerate this violence. I have to ensure that no one knows about it. I have to put on the best face and to put the best foot forward, because I have to maintain the perception that everything is okay, you know. So it is quite telling. And as we begin to break down and look at what we need to do to address this, we know that we have to address also the psychological issues that women have, and their own attitudes to violence that is being meted out against them. Next slide, please. So as I had indicated before, we may sometimes think that, you know, violence against women do not have any impact, or the impact does not go much further than the physical, but it does have an impact on the physical health of women and girls, particularly pertaining to issues surrounding their overall health, their overall mental health, their overall emotional health, and their how they see things and see life. So 35.5% of the respondents indicated that they felt that the impact of violence, gender-based violence, had an impact on their physical health. 9.7% indicated that they had problems walking. 8.9% indicated that they had problems doing their usual activities. Over time, after having been exposed to physical violence, having been exposed to emotional violence, it does now have an impact on your ability to just do your normal duties. 17.1% indicated that they had problems with pain, and 10.3% indicated that they had problems with memory and concentration, not knowing what to do, can't remember certain things, the usual tasks that they would do. They have issues remembering and issues concentrating. Next slide, please. So I want us to look specifically at the issues pertaining to help-seeking behaviors of victims of gender-based violence. And I want to try to move the narrative and to not call these women who would have gone through GBV as victims, if we can speak of them and think of them as survivors, because many have survived and are trying to survive. So as we speak to the issue of health-seeking behaviors, 63% of these women sought no help. And this speaks specifically to the culture of silence. For those who tried to get assistance, they turned to the police or they turned to the healthcare system. Women also turned to the court system, but that was only 5.3% of those women. But very few of them sought help from other forms of social services. And those include the church, the school, the community centers. Very few of them sought help from these social services. So we know that 63% did not seek help, but for those who sought help, from where did the help come? 39.1% indicated that they got no help. So they would have gone to a number of places or gone to a number of persons, done reports to the police, but nothing came out in terms of support. 14.2% indicated that they would have gone to their mother. 18% spoke to seeking help and receiving help from friends. 15.1% from a father. 13.4% from siblings, 7.8% from the police, and 8.6% from the neighbors. And I want you to look at the numbers from the police. You will find that that is the smallest proportion, and it speaks to the fear that women may have in terms of reporting to the police, or not going to the police because they feel that the justice system will not assist, not going to the police because they probably would have gone to the police on previous occasions and the police indicated that, this is a private matter and this should be worked out, indicating the seriousness and how, as a society, we look at the issue of gender-based violence, right? But the telling proportion that we're looking at is that 39.1% of these women receive no help at all. And then we ask ourselves the question, where is the church? There is no indication of any respondent seeking help from the church. So as a church, where are we in terms of providing that assistance and providing the support to women and girls who would have experienced the GBV? Next slide. So we are going to quickly show small snippets of a video that was done through support again from our International Development Panel, and it speaks specifically to women who would have experienced gender-based violence and having the courage to speak. And we're not going to be showing the entire video, but just to show that these survivors have found the courage to speak, and through the assistance of a number of entities have now been able to be of help and support to other persons who are going through GBV. But I want us to look specifically, or to listen specifically to some of the experiences that are being alluded to here, and then we can form our own opinion as to where are we and what can we do to continue to provide that help and that support to women and girls who have gone through gender-based violence. Chanel?
And let me have that assurance, said somebody's there for me too. And one of the time I take off my ring and I give it to the bishop and I said, put it on back, he will change. All of you pray for him. And I said, pray for him. He will even go to them and tell them, say, when I realize him even having a fear, and he will say, yes, I true, and him can't stop a fear. And me tell them, say him hit me, pray for him, all will be well. And I went to different churches, and actually every church I go, I would complain about him. And the same thing over, they don't believe in divorce. I must not leave him. I pray for him, don't care what I tell them that he's doing to me. In 2014, when he beat me up, that time I try with them, look, I say I'm a Christian, I try. When I tell them when he beat me up, them say, what did you do to him? That's what they said. So to me, church was no help. None at all. None, even in the last, when he beat me up in 2017.
Marika, everyone, you were able to hear it, right?
Yes.
All right, wonderful.
Yes. Right. So we heard from Debbie just now. So I'm going to allow Chanel to come back in and to just continue to speak to some of the current perceptions that the church of the church around the issue of GBV, and how as the church we can work together to break down some of those perceptions.
Wonderful. No, thank you, Marika, for sharing those findings. So it's interesting that this survey was actually conducted in 2016. And earlier this year, Marika and I were part of a research team that sought to uncover the roots of gender-based violence. And we were actually having the same findings almost, like 8 years later, Marika? The same findings are happening as the same as 2016. So some of the current perceptions of the church on GBV are that a number of GOJ representatives, as well as persons in the community, especially in the rural spaces that we spoke to, said that GBV is perpetuated through traditional beliefs. So, and I quote, one of the residents that we spoke to said that women are often advised by some church leaders to pray for their abusive husband and to submit to them. And that essentially reinforces a cycle of abuse. One GOJ representative that we spoke to said, in many communities we visit, the women say that pastor says I must submit for him and that my role is to submit. Some of the other perceptions that we found is there is a heavy lack of influence and trust. So one respondent in St. Thomas said that people in the community have said that they have gone to the church about gender-based violence, and then whatever it is that they have spoken about in confidence or said to the pastor, it becomes that preaching point on Sunday. And so imagine that you have opened up as a victim in this case, and you're speaking about your issues, and then on Sunday you're in the congregation and you're essentially hearing all of your business being spewed out. We also found that there's also a misinterpretation of scripture. So one of our respondents from an NGO actually said that a lot of the churches in rural Jamaica, especially, they misinterpret scripture, and so the scripture might be taken out of context. And so their interpretation of the word is often incorrect. But however, many of these communities are often very traditional and patriarchal. So it kind of maintains that power structure that Marika and I spoke to earlier in the conversation. And that power structure essentially subdues females in the congregation and the wider community. One other member of the government of Jamaica, specifically the Bureau of Gender Affairs, said that with a lot of the religions, women are expected to not be seen or heard. The man is the head of the household, and for that, the man essentially dictates what happens. And a lot of the times, like when the victim, usually the female, calls the BGA, she says that if they report it to the pastor and the church, that the pastor will say, of course, again, go and pray for him. It's the devil working on him. God will heal him eventually. And they must accept it because it's nothing of a great deal. And you should respect your husband, essentially, and not do anything. So these were some of the findings that we gathered. One of the other things that came out was there seemed to be an issue with partnering with the church for certain interventions. Another representative said to us that one of the issues that they're facing is some of the churches, when they hear gender-based violence, they don't understand it, and they assume essentially that they're speaking or the BGA is coming to speak about LGBTQ. And so because of that, they are not really so accepting or accommodating. They also try to speak to them about sessions that ties in with human rights and sexual reproduction. And so they said that sometimes some of these churches, once they hear sexual reproduction and human rights, they are thinking that the BGA is trying to promote women having abortions and stuff like that. So there is a little bit of an issue in terms of getting that conversation going. And they said it's not all churches, it's some churches. And so that's one thing that needs to be worked on. So I'm going to hand over to Marika to speak about the legal and institutional framework of GBV. And then I'm going to just wrap up with a call to action and the way forward. Go ahead, Marika.
Yes, thanks again, Chanel. So within the context of GBV, we have recognized that Jamaica is one of the countries that has one of the most a number of legal and institutional frameworks, and we have a lot of that. We recognize that in order to tackle the issue of GBV, we have to have these things in place. But I think critically is not just having these frameworks in place, but what do we do with it, you know? So we know that there are a number of acts that are in place, there are a number of policies, and there are a number of strategic action plans. But we need to critically look at how we can utilize these instruments to ensure that the services that are being provided are reaching those that are in need. So we need to ensure that these frameworks on GBV actually are tackling the issue of GBV. So in order for us as a church to adequately know how to respond to this particular scourge, we also have to be aware of what exists. What are the legal, what is the framework that exists, the framework and in which we can work. So we know that there's a Sexual Offences Act and the Offences Against the Person Act. And right now we have the Domestic Violence Act, and these three acts are going through a period of revision. They're in front of the Joint Select Committee of Parliament, and we're going through a period of revision to make these acts relevant and contextual. A lot has changed since these acts have been in place, but we have to ensure that they are in accordance with the context in which we are working. We also have the Child Care and Protection Act that looks specifically at how we treat with the protection and care of children in violent situations. We also have the Trafficking in Persons Act, and that speaks, of course, specifically to issues pertaining to trafficking in persons. The most recent act that has been passed is the Sexual Harassment Act of 2021, and that looks at issues pertaining to sexual harassment, which is also when you look at sexual harassment, it also has a relationship with gender-based violence, because it speaks to the issue of power and power relationships. So there are a number of legal frameworks, and this list is not exhaustive. And then we know that we have our national policy on gender equality, and we also have a national strategic action plan to eliminate gender-based violence. And this action plan speaks to how all areas of government, all non-government entities, community-based entities, how we can work together, the joint up government approach that we're looking at to adequately attack the issue of gender-based violence. So each entity within our country has a role to play. The faith-based organizations, the non-government organizations, the community-based organization, and the government entities do have a role to play. And this strategic action plan speaks specifically at what we all need to do to eliminate gender-based violence. Chanel.
Wonderful. Thank you, Marika. So as we close, we just want to say that, Marika and I are development practitioners in the field, and so we're very solution oriented, and so we're not going to do a presentation and not have a call to action and not have some solutions based on what we're actually seeing in the field. And what we'd like to say is basically, the role of the church regarding gender-based violence is multifaceted. It involves both positive contributions and significant criticism, but the church in Jamaica really plays a complex role in the context of GBV. And while it has the potential to be a force for positive change, there are some current practices and traditional beliefs that often contribute to perpetuating this gender-based violence in the community. So we really think that there is a critical need for the church to adapt in terms of capacity building. So we want to ensure that church leaders are equipped to offer informed and compassionate support to GBV survivors rather than perpetuating some harmful traditional beliefs. We want to ensure that the churches can create safe spaces and support systems. And that really includes establishing confidential and safe spaces within the church for individuals to report GBV and to seek support without fear of judgment or retribution. We want to develop certain support systems, including counseling services and referral networks to assist the GBV. So as Marika said earlier, there are a number of agencies, a number of NGOs that actually play a role. And so if we can just connect them to those services as a church, that would be amazing. Another call to action is to raise awareness and challenge these harmful norms. So it's important for the church to kind of re-exert themselves in society, if you will, to challenge and address harmful norms and practices that perpetuate the GBV. And some churches are advising women to submit to their abusive husbands or to keep silent about the abuse. So if the church could launch an awareness campaign, that would be great. As I said before, collaborating with community organizations. So engaging in community outreach programs that address GBV and promote gender equality. And that will really leverage the church's influence to foster positive change. And last but certainly not least, we also think that GBV education can also be incorporated into religious teachings. And we can use the religious texts and principles to support the message that GBV is really contrary to the values of love, respect, and dignity. Marika, I don't know if you want to add anything else. That's really it for us. And if not, Marika, then we'll hand over to our lovely moderator for the evening.
Thank you, Juna. I just wanted to add that we recognize that the church has been doing significant work already in this space. And we applaud the work that has been done. But as Chanel says, there is a need to do more work, and there's a need to continue to raise that awareness, and there's a need to continue to collaborate. No one entity has all the solutions. No one entity has all the resources. So it is important that we create the avenue and the spaces for continued collaboration, continued working together, and to continue to share. Because one denomination may be doing something that another denomination is not doing, and they can share those experiences and continue to help everyone. So we applaud what is being done, but of course there's need for continuous work and continuous collaboration, because we really need to tackle this issue of GBV, because it affects us all. It affects our families, it affects our children, it affects our overall society. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Wow. Oh, wow. Thank you, ladies, so much for providing such a rich presentation. This certainly had a lot of details, a lot of statistics that are quite alarming, especially when we look at the attitudes of, and I made my notes here, the attitudes to violence against women. But I think and Bertram, Father Gail, I'm coming to you. So I know you have some questions and comments coming from social media, and we'll take those shortly. But I just wanted to tap into something that was just said. One of the very last things, to incorporate GBV education into religious teaching. And in looking at some of the statistics that you mentioned before, especially looking at the age range, and I noted only from 25 to 29 and upwards, because that was shocking for me, but younger girls would have experienced GBV as well. Is it only in religious teaching that we would want to have GBV education, considering well, I suppose, the community, the church this is where the church would collaborate with the community, because I look at school as another space to raise that kind of awareness. But we go to the social media correspondent, Father Gail, and then we can come back to this point. Father Gail.
Hey, Monique, thank you so very much. And
tell me that people have been commenting. Tell me.
We have some comments. We have some comments.
Okay,
and
great.
In fact, one of the first comments, someone said that they thought that the percentage would have been higher in terms of the number of women, the percentage of women who experience gender-based violence. It's
That's
also,
shocking, isn't it?
yes, yes, it is. I find it interesting that some persons are expecting the percentage to be a bit higher, which
That
does,
is interesting indeed.
yes, yes, yes. There is also some talk here about how it is that women, so sort of underscoring what was said about women who are pregnant experiencing abuse. That I must admit come as a bit of a surprise to me, because one would think that one would want to protect a woman at this vulnerable stage in their lives. There's a question that I would want to pass on, and it was raised by, boy, I'm kind of trying to find it now because, okay, good. One Angela Brown asked, is there a specific group or movement to protect women and girls better and raise awareness? So I suppose that that question would be targeted toward one of the two presenters that just came up.
Okay, so I'll try as best to answer, and Chanel will back me up. So the government of Jamaica has made it its point of duty to ensure that there are services available to those women and girls or women and children who have experienced gender-based violence. So there are a plethora of services that are available. The government of Jamaica works with our NGO groups to ensure that these services are available to survivors of GBV. I speak specifically to providing support through crisis centers. So we know Woman Inc., which is an NGO, has crisis centers that the government support in terms of giving them subvention for them to continue to help support women and girls, providing transitional spaces, providing a space for counseling, providing spaces so that they can, and their children can get back on their feet, so to speak. In recent years, about a year and a half now, the government has also opened 2 shelters for victims, and we're changing the narrative, the survivors of GBV. And these spaces are government owned, and they're also supported by our other partners to ensure that these women have safe spaces, can also be exposed to psychological, emotional counseling, can transition, can be able to support themselves and their children to move out of these situations that they're in. So I speak specifically to what the government provides, but I know too that other NGO groups work with the government, work by themselves. Other faith-based organizations also provide support to victims, or rather survivors of GBV. So we can share the BGO helpline, the Bureau of Gender Affairs, which is the division responsible for gender affairs out of the Ministry of Culture, Entertainment and Sport. They have their shelter lines that we can provide, so that if anyone do require these services, the services are available.
Yeah, if I can just add to what Marika said, there are a number of NGOs who are actually doing a lot of work and doing a lot of advocacy work. I know that Caraman is doing a research now on gender-based violence, as well as WMW is also in that space, doing a lot of advocacy work, a lot of activism around gender-based violence. But Father Gail, I just want to go back to what you said initially, that there were some persons saying that they expected the numbers of GBV to be higher, and it is indeed higher. It's just that we were sharing the findings from the prevalence survey, which was done in 2016, but there are other research going on now, or that have just been wrapped up, which shows that gender-based violence has increased from 2016 to now. So it's funny that they're expecting it, but it shows the reality on the ground, right? So they're like, wait, I know about some people and some things that's happening, so it should definitely be higher. You know, it's unfortunate, but it's definitely, and I see Miss Phillips with her hand raised. Go ahead.
Okay, and they would have expected to go higher because of COVID.
Yes.
Ah, right.
Great point. Yes.
We did
yes.
not factor in the COVID factor, but there has been studies indicating that GBV has increased, especially throughout the COVID period and subsequent to COVID. And I also want to add that to remember that it is actually higher than what we are reporting, because there remains a culture of silence where GBV still goes unreported, or it is underreported. So yes, but you know, we spoke to the data coming out of that particular prevalence survey.
Precisely, and even
Go ahead, Chanel.
No, I just wanted to say that as I was saying in the presentation, Marika and I were a part of a research team that just wrapped up some research, and it's very common, that culture of silence. People are just like, a man or woman business, that, you know, we're not talk about it. And even some of the police, like, they'll say that they call the police and the police say, we're not come because I'm on a woman business. And it's like they don't realize that that's a part of their charge, that they need to come when they're called for matters of domestic violence. So still very common. And I mean, this research was undertaken across, what was it, 3 or 4 parishes, Marika? St. Thomas, Clarendon, Westmoreland, Kingston, and St. Andrew, and it was the same across all parishes, this culture of silence. So, yeah.
Yes, I was looking at the statistics that you presented, and it said that 30% actually said it's a private matter. Gender-based violence is a private matter. Just tapping into what I had mentioned before about other entities approaching and addressing gender-based violence, you know, in their own way, not just through the church, but through schools. I want to invite us to look at a video that was actually done by the Hampton School Choir. And this song was actually written, No Man Can Hold. It was actually written in 2020 to highlight the tragic death of a Hampton old girl who suffered at the hands of her ex-boyfriend. Her name of blessed memory is Nevia Sinclair. And the video is meant to inspire women to not endure. And also, it's also a message for men to not engage. But let us look at the video, and then we will continue our discussion afterwards.
Girl cry, and if she ever try run away, she might not live. fear, he come back and bruise me. Oh no, me never come in at this fear verbally abuse me. No way, me never come in at this fear gun or knife. Me never come in at this fear run film. Me never come in at this fear me daddy ball out. Oh God, me daughter. So you think you own me just because you said I love you? So you think you own me just because we share a good time or two? Please go look some help, me friend, before you do things you cannot defend. Please go look some help, me friend. Me tell you once, me I go tell you again. Please go look some help, me friend. Abusive behavior must come to an end. 'Cause no man can own a woman after you know master God. No man can own. And no man can own. Make me tell you, no man can own a woman. No.
Indeed, no man can own a woman. But I want to tackle our presenters. I know Father Gale has some questions and some comments as he indicated. I will, but when I listen to the song, and I had listened to it before and I'm listening to it now, it speaks directly to what Chanel would have mentioned in terms of some of the root causes when we look at culture and tradition and we look at patriarchy and power, you know, the warning signs that are there that we tend to overlook. But I want you to think about this question and answer it a little later on. Are there new warning signs outside of those that are mentioned in the song? What are the different warning signs that will appear? But Father Gale, you had a question that you indicated you wanted to ask, so I'll allow you to ask and then let them brew on that question I asked earlier.
Yes, the question I wanted to ask is in relation to the reality. I mean, as a priest, and I'm sure.
And as a man.
And as a man, that's right. One of the issues that we don't hear spoken about much, and I think the conversation so far has focused on violence that women face, gender-based violence, by women in particular. Now, would it be possible for you to speak about the issue of gender-based violence as it is experienced by men? Now, I would say that maybe there is also a culture of silence here that is concerned. You can elaborate on that. You can also talk about how it is that that reveals those realities of culture and so on may affect the underreporting of such incidents. Please go ahead.
So Marika can start, and then I'll piggyback on the end because we had a lot of stories about this coming out of the field. But go ahead, Marika.
Yes, Father Gale, there is a culture of silence surrounding issues pertaining to violence against men. We know it exists, but I think particularly because of our understanding of masculinity and where men are and are expected to be in society, men who experience violence find it very difficult to report it and to speak to it. Chanel indicated that the research that we did, actually, we saw anecdotes coming out and experiences being spoken about regarding the violence that men experience and the fear of speaking about it, the stigma that is attached to speaking about it, the discrimination that they would experience speaking about it, and not getting the sufficient support from the support services when they speak about issues pertaining to violence. So there are a lot of cultural issues surrounding how men experience violence and how it is that they get the support that they require when they experience violence. The Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sport, through the Bureau of Gender Affairs, has now been looking specifically at how we can address issues pertaining to men and masculinities, and of course, issues pertaining to how men experience and speak to violence and what support mechanisms that should be in place to help these men. So there is work afoot through the government to help to support our men. And we know that, when we speak to, men going through violence, we say, but you're a man, or you feel make woman beat you, what kind of man you be, you understand? So these affect how our men get the support that they require when they experience violence, gender-based violence, because it is not, when we speak to gender-based violence, it's not about just women being, exposed to violence, but men are being exposed to violence as well. Chanel, I don't know if
Absolutely.
you want to add anything.
No, definitely. I mean, in one of our focus groups, I remember specifically a man speaking about being violently attacked, and he said that when he went to the police station, they laughed at him and them said, "Go on back up your yard. What you talking about? You know what I mean?" And he was ridiculed further by the community. So he's like, what am I supposed to do? And they also spoke about being, what do they call it, Marika, a jellyback man? You can't be soft, you have to be firm. And and interestingly, in the research that we did, we also spoke to boys because we wanted to understand how they feel about it. And they said that they actually said it's our fault. They said it's our fault because we also don't allow them to cry and express their emotions. So they're like, when we actually grow up, you want us to cry and be these emotional men, but we can't, because from children, you said, stop crying, stop the bawling, be tough, be strong, be firm, etc. So it's that kind of paradigm shift that also needs to happen to also change what is happening in the landscape culturally, changing the fact that men don't have to keep all of their emotions in. Men should be able to go to the police and say, I am being abused, because they are people too, you know what I mean? So it definitely has to be, we have to change these negative and vicious cultural and social norms that we continue to perpetuate, that are perpetuating this culture of silence that Marika is speaking to. And this issue is from Morant Point to Negril, in every community.
I can imagine. And as you mentioned, the fact that boys would share would have their take on the matter and say, because you don't allow us to cry, you don't allow us to express our emotions, they too become a part of this negative cycle. And we also, another thing to look at is the fact that some of these very same boys were abused when they were, well, they are experiencing forms of GBV. And so they grow up thinking too that it is the norm. It is the powerless. They are powerless at that time. And then they assume a role of power. And for them, one element of power is to exercise some elements of GBV. At this time, we are going to bring in to the conversation Mrs. Patricia Donald Phillips. Mrs. Phillips, hi, good evening. Look at that lovely smile. Yes. So the conversation has been going, the statistics are out, the research has been done. We understand what has been put on the table, and you are here to talk to us about a toolkit for survival.
Absolutely, we are in the fight. Sorry to use the language of violence, but we're in the fight.
Yeah, it really is a fight, so do share with us.
We're not turning any cheek at all. Not this one, and the one we're sitting on.
I tell you, but share with us how it is that we can, what are these toolkits? How can we access them? How do we use them?
Well, I'm going to ask the techie person to info me on the first slide, which shares with us that much is happening, as somebody indicated earlier, within faith-based organizations, of which the church is a part. We're multicultural. Church is just one of the many spiritualities we have. And so the European Union, partnering with the UN Women, is doing quite a bit of work. And there's something called the Spotlight Initiative, which is Caribbean-wide, actually, that are seeking to promote and to push the response against gender-based violence. So the toolkit is really just one of many resources that will be made available. And we're hoping that the UN Women will have it on its website. At this point in time, when it's like almost like in a trials period, I do share it with persons so we can get feedback on it. So this is just to give you a little insight. If you can move for me to the next slide. So who is it for? It's for all of us, spiritual, religious, all the holy people, and the wannabe holies, Jamaica and Caribbean wide. And what is it? Essentially, some strategies are there, some ideas for actual campaigns. There are videos, there are books, and they're actually human beings that you can call on. Go on your WhatsApp, no matter where you are in the world, here in Jamaica as well, and actually get some support, some counseling support or some referral support. And how do you use it? In your Bible study, in your sermons, in your Quran study, because again, not just for Christian people. You can actually cut a slide, put it into a sermon, put a slide into a Bible study for a conversation, and there are some champions, some actual real people, some of them you know. I think we actually have one of our champions here with us this evening. Hi, Father Horace, if you're still there. And you can use this for conversation. So you can actually download it to use it. Next slide for me, please, where I just give you just a quick overview that, so there's a theoretical component. Lots of the stuff that Chanel and Marika shared with you, you can go back and find them here in one place. There's millions of words online, tons of toolkits, but they tend to be in narrative form. Lots of words to wade through, and then you begin to fall asleep. So this gives you like PowerPoint slides that you can take and just use and not be afraid to say, oh, you're going to use it. And so you have the theoretical with explanation of the terms. Many religious people say they don't know what we're talking about. Not just the men, the women too. Next one, please. So I'm gonna jump down. So there's a practical part now, which helps you to look at some strategies, some actual things you can do. As Chanel and Marika did, there was a call to action, but how do you really get engaged? And so this will give you some practical ways of doing that. And I want to share one, which is the Thursdays in Black, which is, it's a worldwide campaign. It's a communication campaign, and it allows congregations or faith communities to literally have a particular strategy or action that you're doing. Can you find the Thursdays in Black for me, please? Or IT person? So some of you may already be engaged in this. Thursdays in Black is initiated by the World Council of Churches. It was launched in Jamaica from 2021. And some people still tell me, ask me, what is that? Simply wear black on a Thursday. It's hot like hell now. So we say it gives you a little taste of the punishment of the physical pain that people who survive GBV. And I am one of those who, that we live with, even after we are healed, you still will go back. And so there are buttons that you can use. If you shift to the other section for me, please. Go back. There should be another slide which tells you that they're like, yes. So you can create your own bookmarks, and you can maybe have, this is the flip side bookmark, and there's a site you can go to. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. It exists already, and you can easily reproduce them yourself. Persons have gotten sponsors to allow them to reproduce the buttons. The Jamaica Council of Churches had some of these. We are trying to see if we can support them to have more, but individual congregations can make use of these physical tools. And then we have the champions. Move ahead to. So this is really individuals who are courageous enough to say they want to just simply make a statement about gender-based violence. Some people are uncomfortable with the term gender-based violence. As was said in the presentation, people automatically think LB, they think lesbians and gay people and homosexuals, and they can't cope with it. So family violence is a term that some people are now using. And so we want to share with you an example of what a champion says. You can use this for conversations, sermons, studies, group meetings. So we're going to ask if we can play one of our bishops' statement.
Greetings to our cherished faith communities. I am the Right Reverend Garth Mylott, Bishop of Kingston, and a champion for gender relations and families. Today we address a pressing issue that demands our collective attention: gender-based violence and domestic violence. Gender-based violence is directed at persons because of their gender, deeply rooted in the power inequalities between women and men. Gender-based violence is one of the most notable human rights violations. It includes physical, emotional, spiritual, and economic harm. Within our sacred spaces, we preach love, compassion, and unity. Yet some of our own are suffering in silence. Gender-based and family violence tears at the fabric of our communities. It affects everyone. Shockingly, recent UNICEF statistics reveal that 1 in 3 children worldwide experience the pain of violence within their homes. The Jamaica Constabulary Forces 2020 report indicates that over 82% of murders, the victims were men. Another alarming statistic is that 1 in every 4 women has experienced physical or sexual violence. These are not just data, it's a call for action. People of faith, the time for action is now. Let us be architects of change, breaking the cycle of silence. By uniting against gender and family violence, we can create communities where every individual is treated with dignity and respect. It's time for religious and spiritual leaders to intervene. Together, let's create communities where love
And that's fine. It ends right.
prevails
Yeah.
over violence. Come, people of faith, we can make that difference.
And he pretty much says, come, let's act on it. And that's pretty much the introduction to this toolkit, which we can make available to persons. As I said, the intention is for you to make use of it in your actual space. And that's pretty much it. Can't hear you, Monique. You're
I'm muted. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Thanks so much for sharing that, Pat, and thanks so much for sharing from one of the champions that we have. Is there well, you would have made mention of the how we can get access to the information, right? Right. Okay. And so we implore our viewers to reach out and to make contact. I think it is very critical, especially because in listening to the presentation by Marika and Chanel, in talking about the apparent misconception and misinformation that comes or that may come from the church in terms of how they approach women and I dare not even think of how they will respond to men who come as victims of gender-based violence. I mean, the women will be more vocal and open in stating, the response: pray out the demon, submit, go home and endure, thy burden. But, you can just imagine if a man would go to the pastor or the priest and express his being ill at ease and what the response will be. And so I think it is extremely important that we access this toolkit and make use of it. Bertram, is there any comment or question that you have coming from social media that we can post to the panelists and then ask them to respond, and at the same time to craft a final comment from each of them?
Yes, let me pose a question from the the chat, someone asked, how about addressing the root causes, bring public awareness, as in ads, raise boys to be more sensible, accountable, not praise boys for aggression or dominance.
Okay, so as we invite each panelist to give a response, we ask at the same time that you just give a closing comment and a word of encouragement. Okay, do I invite, is there anybody who would like to start first, or do I start with Marika? Let's start with you. Did you hear the question from Father Gale?
I'm going to ask Father Gale to repeat the question, please.
Okay, go ahead for me, Father Gale.
How about addressing root causes? And I suppose that what comes after are some of the ways in which the person assume that the root causes can be dealt with. Bring public awareness, as in ads, so you use advertisements. Raise boys to be more sensible and accountable, and not praise them for aggression or dominance. And in your response, I would perhaps want to broaden it and make it a bit more gender neutral.
I was about to ask, because instead of saying just boys, remember that boys suffer at the hands of, as well. So just both gender.
And while you do that, see, not talk about gender neutrality. Question I wanted to ask, and maybe you can tie it into this, is how do you see the issue of GBV connected to the motion raised by Minister Lisa Hanna recently to make rape issue make it gender neutral as opposed to gender specific as it is currently?
So these questions are really, really loaded, and I'll try my best to see how best I can respond.
And I mean, at this time, we're so sorry, but perhaps we
and I may not be able to respond to all, but I just wanted to agree with the person who posed the suggestion as to how we can try and tackle some of the root causes of GBV, and yes, we have to look at the issue of masculinities and how we understand our Caribbean and Jamaican masculinity to be, and the expectations and the perceptions that we have of the role of women and men in society, and in particular in relationships. So the expectations that we have, the gender roles and the gender norms that we understand each sex is to perform within in relationships has a lot to do with the power dynamics and how gender-based violence is played out in the relationship. So we have to tackle some of those issues, the gender norms, the understandings of what it is to be man, what it is to be woman, and how we perceive ourselves to be is one of the ways that we can begin to tackle the issue of GBV. Getting our boys and our girls to understand from very young the importance of having respect for each other, understanding that we are different, but in that difference we are equal, and there is the need for us to treat each other with equally, and to respect each other. So that is also very important as we begin to look at the issue of GBV. And I dare say it will also help us to tackle the issue of violence that we have in our nation. I think some people perceive Jamaica to be a violent country, and that is seen in our children, that is seen in our interactions in school, that is seen in our interactions as parents, how we interact with hierarchy and power, so we have to tackle that issue of our understanding of violence and how we tear down violence. So in response to the issue of the issue that you presented, Father Gale, regarding MP Lisa Hanna, we are now looking at the issue of rape. We are now, as I said, there are a number of laws that are before the Joint Select Committee, and the Domestic Violence Act and issues pertaining to rape are part of that conversation. I don't know the extent to which these other, issues will be considered, but I know that we have to widen the issue that we're having really in terms of prosecution is how we define domestic violence, how we define rape and all those things. So our laws are currently looking at that. So of course the conversation needs to be had as to how we can define and widen definition of course rape, domestic violence, and so on. And I just want to leave with you that we are all in this fight together. As Pat said, and we are not doing it alone. We have to understand that we're doing it as a community, and we can only achieve and we can only succeed as a community if we do it together. So regardless of our denomination, regardless of our religion, regardless of our persuasion, and regardless of our understandings, we have to come to that common ground where we understand that gender-based violence not only impacts persons individually, but it impacts the nation holistically. It impacts a community, it impacts a family, and by extension, it impacts our country. So we have to work together to see how best we can break the cycle of violence, because when the children start early and they experience violence early, they become violence producers. When they're victims of violence, they become violence producers. And that is what we're seeing in our society now. And it reaches the relationship and it reaches our entire nation. So we have to work together to break the scourge of GBV.
Thank you so much. Right. Thank you so much for that, Marika. We go to Chanel.
Yeah, so I just want to add that there were two groups that came out in our research that we failed to mention in this presentation today, and that's really persons with disabilities, as well as the gender-based violence that's happening in the elderly with senior citizens. You know what I mean? So, if time would allow, that's a whole nother presentation that Marika and I could actually speak about. But just piggybacking off of some things that Marika said. Firstly, there are several key areas that really require our collective effort and commitment to address. As Marika said, we have to recognize the crucial role that men and masculinity plays, both in perpetuating GBV and also preventing GBV. And so, as Marika said, we have to challenge these norms of masculinity and the fact that masculinity equates strength and dominance. It's equated to aggression, strength, dominance. And so, as we said earlier, men must be encouraged to really express emotions healthily and to reject these violent means of asserting power. And we really need to go back to those social and cultural norms and promote positive and inclusive models of masculinity. And that's something that the government and a number of NGOs are actually doing. And we need to create a supportive and equitable environment for everyone. I really think that's where it starts. And just going back to the culture of the culture of silence, that is also going to stem from doing a lot of work on the ground in the schools, as Monique rightfully said. But that's also another ticklish subject. How do we get the Ministry of Education on board to actually speak about some of these things in the school? That's also going to be another thing. But it's going to take a collaborative and concerted effort from all aspects of society to address a number of the issues, but we have to, of course, address it from the root, and that's our cultural and social norms that are also being perpetuated in the media, and in social media especially. Yeah, I just want to also speak about one other thing. When Marika and I were also doing the research, we also found that there are acceptable levels of violence coming out in the community. So for example, as young as 16 and 17, the boys and the girls were actually saying that if you're jerked, like if you're hit, like if you're slapped, they don't consider that to be violence. And young girls were actually saying that when they're in relationships with men, it's acceptable for the man to jerk them and say, hey, watch yourself, you're falling out of line, get back in line. And they only consider gender-based violence to be if they're on the ground being hit and they can't be helped, or they can't help themselves. You know what I mean? So that kind of warped view of what gender-based violence really is, that's going to take a concerted effort for all of us to really say, hey, this is what it really is, and this is an issue. So
Okay. Thank you so much, Chanel. Thank you so much, Chanel. Pat, we give you the last few seconds if you don't mind.
Not at all. My last few words are to say congratulations to the Jamaica Council of Churches and to watch the diocese and to all the churches, all the FBOs that have already been engaging this battle against gender-based violence, seeing it as a spiritual warfare and knowing that it must be engaged here on spiritual lines as well as the physical. I've been at this battle for 40 years, and I therefore know that we have gained ground. And just to encourage those who continue in the battle, educate yourselves. The things grow, learn every day, and make a personal commitment to speak out and to resist any form of violence or to be a perpetrator yourself.
Okay, there we have it. We have come to the end of our conversation, viewers, even though there is so much to say. So I don't know if perhaps, well, our executive producers will have to think about it. Can there be a part 2? Because there are still so many questions to ask. There are about 4 pertinent questions that have not yet been asked. But let's see what happens. Let's see if our panelists will be available. Again, I do hope so. Yes, because there is much that they have to say. So viewers, we have come to the end of this conversation, and we would like to thank our partners, the JCC. We'd like to thank the panelists, Marika, Chanel, and Pat, for sharing with us their findings, the research, the toolkit on gender-based violence. Thank you so much, ladies. We'd like to say thank you too to Pastor Carl Smith for coming and just giving us an overview of how the JCC views gender-based violence and their participation in the project. We will wrap our conversation, and we thank you for joining. We thank you for your questions and your comments. I'd like to say thank you to Father Bertram Gale, who was our social media correspondent, Mr. Andrew Hutchinson, our producer, Father Kirk Brown, our executive producer, and I am Monique Castle. I was your host. Do have yourselves a good evening and see you next time for another conversation.